Welcome, everyone. My name is George Pulakidas, and I will be the moderator for today's exciting panel titled Unlocking Nature's Potential Using Genomics for Understanding and Benefiting from Biodiversity. I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. I would also like to thank the Canadian Science Policy Centre for providing us the opportunity to have a discussion on this important topic. First, a few administrative items for today's session. I would like to let the audience know that you're not visible and the panel is held in a webinar format. We will be taking questions through the Q&A feature, so please send your questions anytime. And use the chat line only for communicating any issues you may have with the organizers. Otherwise, use the Q&A feature you see at the bottom. As well, for the questions, instead of repeating questions, if you see one that you like, you can just upvote a question and it can be asked at the end. So the plan is that we will have about an hour for a more structured discussion, and then at the end of the session, we can get into the questions from the audience. So now starting with the session, as I said, my name is George Pulakidas. I'm a Genomics and Society Advisor at Genome British Columbia. And here my work focuses on the ethical, environmental, economic, legal, and social implications of genomics, as well as the intersection of genomics and public policy. I'm also a PhD candidate in political science at the University of Toronto. And some of my previous roles include senior advisor at the Advanced Technologies Unit at the Ontario Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, as well as a researcher at the Innovation Policy Lab at the Mann School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. I'm very excited to introduce such a stellar panel, and I will try to keep the introductions brief, despite the very long list of accomplishments the panelists have. I'll start with Dr. Kelly Bannister, who is a co-director of the Policy Project on Ecological Governance and leads the policy biocultural ethics work at the University of Victoria. She's an ethnobiologist with postdoctoral training and over 20 years of experience in applied ethics. Her work encompasses collaborative approaches to biocultural diversity, research and education, biodiversity policy, and biocultural ethics. Kelly's focus is on ethical and legal issues in research involving biodiversity and indigenous cultural knowledge, something we hope to explore in today's session. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and Microbiology and a Master's of Science in Microbial Genetics from the University of Victoria, and a PhD in Ethnobotany and Phytochemistry from the University of British Columbia. Our next panelist is Dr. Federica Di Palma, who is the Chief Scientific Officer and Vice President Research and Innovation at Genome British Columbia. She also serves at the leadership team of the Earth Biogenome Project and as the chair of the project's International Scientific Committee. Federica also remains a professorial fellow in biodiversity in the School of Biological Sciences at the University of East Anglia. Federica holds a Bachelor of Science in Cell and Molecular Biology from the University of Essex and a PhD in Immunogenetics from the University of Reading. Our next panelist is Dr. Raymond Andersen, who is a professor at the Department of Chemistry and the Department of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of British Columbia. He's an international expert in the discovery of novel marine natural products with biological activities that make them useful as tools for chemical biology and new drug targets. Specifically, his lab continually collects marine organisms from tropical and cold temperature ocean habitats, and their extracts are screened for the development of new anti-carcinoid drugs, with some of them successfully making it to market. He has been awarded the Chemical Institute of Canada Medal and is a fellow at the Royal Society of Canada. Raymond holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Alberta, a Master's of Science from the University of California, Berkeley, and a PhD from the University of California, San Diego. Last but not least, Dr. Greg Bouty. He is the Senior Director of Breeding and Genetics at Aurora Cannabis, where he leads the development of new cannabis cultivars and the discovery of genetic bases of key traits. Previously, he worked as a trait geneticist in Monsanto's vegetable seed division enabling marker-assisted selection in tomatoes for important disease and quality traits, as well as building new hybrids with multiple disease-tolerant traits. Greg earned his PhD at UBC in the Riesbeck lab, working on sunflower genomics and breeding with a focus on the use of wild relatives. Welcome everyone, and thank you again very much for coming to today's discussion. I have a few questions, as you know, but I'm hoping you will just take it and discuss more broadly. So first, I would like to start with a very high-level question about biodiversity, and to make sure that we all understand what we're talking about. It's a popular word. It has been used in so many ways. And people from the audience might be also wondering, despite the sort of blurb we had about today's session, what we want to discuss. So I want to ask all of you, what does biodiversity mean to you, and how does it apply in your work? So perhaps we'll go in the same order we did the introductions. Kelly, Federica, and then Raymond and Greg.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to mention that I'm calling in from Coast Salish territory in the home and waterlands of the Penellicut tribe on a small island just off the coast here. Yeah, biodiversity, I'm really glad for the question because coming from an ethics perspective and cross-cultural ethics, we tend to not necessarily probe what we mean when we use the words that we use. And biodiversity for me is one of those terms, actually. So my scientific training tells me biodiversity is about, all living things and the ecosystems from which they emerge and all those dynamics. But that's I've learned is a very Western scientific worldview and mindset. And I've come to understand over the years, I understand biodiversity as, from other worldviews, indigenous worldviews, for example, doesn't just include what we in Western society might consider living, animate life flowing through as we might speak from a Western sense, but living could be rocks, living could be rivers, living could be air. And so I think biodiversity for me and in my work is more accurately biocultural diversity, which includes that which we understand as animate and living, that which we understand as inanimate and perhaps with spiritual dimensions, and also the linguistic dimension that ties biodiversity to cultures in the land. So I have a very kind of all-encompassing sense of what biodiversity is, and I'll be speaking from that.
Great, thank you. Federica?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question, George. So being a genomicist, biodiversity to me means genetic and genomic diversity between ecosystem and of course species as well, but also between species, between populations within a species. And it's really critical for, it's what I've always studied, is this vast array of genetic diversity that exists, and now it's critical to the adaptability and the resilience and to the health of species and ecosystem. Important because, of course, we benefit from it through our ecosystem services. And so the interplay between this genetic diversity and how it benefits us is something that really has interested me. And part of my work has also been looking at ways that we could more equitably distribute these benefits from this biodiversity, and through also mechanism of benefit or agreements or benefit sharing. And this is an area that I am particularly fond of late, particularly after the latest biodiversity framework that came out of COP15, where much of the discussions were around the benefit sharing agreement around the access to genetic information. So
that's great, thank you. You mentioned a few things we'll get into later as well, benefiting aspect as well as the equitable aspects of things. Thank you, Federica. Raymond, what does biodiversity mean to you, and how does it apply in your work?
Okay, thanks, George. So as you said, I'm interested in discovering new natural products that have biological activities relevant for drug discovery. And the motivation is that about 50% of the drugs that are used in clinical trials are based on natural products. And these natural products are complex molecules that would not be designed by human beings. They come from living organisms. The thing that makes them interesting from our perspective is that any individual natural product is usually only found in 1 or 2 species worldwide. And so when you're doing drug discovery, really what you want is you want chemical diversity. You want to screen large libraries of molecules that have very different chemical structures. And natural products naturally fit into that very nicely. But if you want to get large chemical diversity, really what you have to do is sample large biodiversity, because different organisms produce different natural products. And so what biodiversity means to me is collecting lots of different species of whatever organism you're interested in, because that will yield vast chemical diversity, which is really what we need for drug discovery.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I took maybe a fairly analytical view of this originally, but it's very interesting to hear Kelly's view on it. So I really appreciate that one. Because to me, I think of, when I think of biodiversity, I just think of sort of the sum of all the genetic variation, right? All the different DNA sequences out there, and that can be at any scale. So that could be, all of Earth or all the species in a forest. But really, the context is super important, and a part of a functioning ecosystem, is having, air and rocks, as you mentioned. You can't really have one without the other. So yeah, that was kind of nice to hear a different view there. But when it comes to work, I'll have to take a painfully narrow view of what biodiversity is, because for plant breeders, when we think about biodiversity, we usually just think about primary and secondary gene pools. So this would be either the same species and wild or land races, or other species that are interfertile, so that can essentially have sex with the crop that you're working on. So in cannabis, there's only cannabis sativa. There's one species. It's super diverse, but there's only one species that I get to work with. But in something like sunflowers that I worked on previously, there's a couple dozen different species spread all across North America that is interfertile with the cultivated sunflower that is sort of the gene pool, the biodiversity that we get to work, the sunflower breeders work with.
Great, thank you. I'm excited to see things planned, things work the way I was hoping, that we can see all the different perspectives come together. So I'm looking now in the next question. I'll combine 2 questions since you can probably talk to them at the same time. So when we talk about benefiting from biodiversity, then we have the same sort of tensions or interesting dynamics we have with the word biodiversity as well. It can mean a lot of different things. It can be interpreted and used in many different ways. So I'll be interested to hear from you, and perhaps we can go in the same order. How can we benefit from the biodiversity? What does benefiting from biodiversity mean to you? And what opportunities do you see for Canada as a whole and for BC specifically? And we can start with Kelly, and then Federica, and then continue.
Well, I love this question, and I also want to flip it around, because I think it's not the only question that needs to be asked. And I'll put this out there right off the bat I'll just offer it in. The whole title and the whole assumption around benefits is there's a particular paradigm at work here, looking for the benefits, looking for the grab, looking for the get, even with the best intentions. And when it comes to biodiversity and many other things, my question would be, first, what is our responsibility? What are our responsibilities? What are the considerations we need to think about before we even think about benefiting from biodiversity? If we don't do everything possible to be responsible to and support biodiversity first, then there is no biodiversity to benefit from. So for me, it's sort of a prerequisite question and an encouragement for us to think about benefits and the opportunities there integrally linked with the responsibilities. There's a reciprocity there that I think we can't ignore. But I think there's tremendous benefits, not just from the kinds of things that could be discovered and be of use to society. And biodiversity, bioprospecting goes back decades for me. This is sort of a second or third time around. Back then we used to call it genetic resources, and now it's genomics. And before that it was natural resources or something else. But there's clearly so many benefits to be had in terms of what tangibly could be produced and created as per all the other panelists' work of benefit to society. I also think that there's an educational dimension and awareness dimension that we need to pair with, to partner with our search for useful things for society, and that is the education about biodiversity and the well-being of Mother Earth, the Earth itself. As we gain, we need to I think pair that accountability and responsibility of how can we give back and ensure the well-being from that which we are looking to receive. I think in BC we have a tremendous potential here because with Indigenous peoples having such a increasingly strong, passionate, informed voice and advising in so many dimensions that would relate to biodiversity and the question that we have opportunity and responsibility to include more voices in the conversation to get that kind of guidance and in who benefits in what ways, who might be paying the costs, and to have a kind of a well-rounded approach to this.
Well, I hope we'll get into some of this in this discussion as well. I know there are huge topics, but at least we can touch on some of this. Federica, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kelly. That was great. I like the word the responsibility. I think even in the genomics, which in my work through biodiversity genomics, which I have done in developing country over the last few years, particularly, the word responsible is something that has come. That has been very important. Responsible innovation. That's how we defined our, the application of our genomic technology to aid biodiversity monitoring, cataloging, management, and protection, and also the sustainable use. So this is going back to bioprospecting as well. I think it's for me, biodiversity is a huge, it's hugely beneficial in a holistic way, George. So we need to. It's each one of us has a very. It's great this panel actually because each one of us has such a niche focus. I particularly by background, my work is on genetic diversity of vertebrate species and understanding how their adaptability and their evolution and so on. And then you have bioprospecting and you have plant breeding, and then and we can discuss also the responsibility around all of this. So I really enjoy being here today. For me, I would say that what does benefit mean? For me, particularly, my attention has been trying to understand really how do we unlock some real economic incentives, frankly, for this work moving forward, and because I do feel that. That is an area that is not really been very well funded. And I also don't think that the value chain is very equitable either. And that moving forward, we know this is an extremely important aspect of our future economy. And so, yeah, that's where I am with my thinking right now on that benefit topic.
Great, thank you. Raymond, what are your thoughts in terms of how we can benefit from biodiversity, and what do you see for BC and Canada?
Okay, let me just give you an example. So just in January, there was a drug that was approved to give an orphan drug approval for treatment of children, pediatric, basically, children that had acute myelogenous leukemia. And prior to the approval of this drug, they all died. There was no way to treat them. And this drug is based on a natural product that we discovered back in the 1990s or something like that. But without this compound, all these children would die. So This is not something that's going to make a lot of money, but it makes a huge difference to the few patients that get treated with it. The drug is also currently in phase 1, phase 2 trials for treatment of ovarian and endometrial cancer. So I think it's going to have a broader implication. So, you know, there really this use of natural products from the environment to develop drugs, I think, is really important. That's a real benefit that we have. And, you know, going back to your comments about responsibility, you know, when we collect, we never collect more than a kilogram, not even a kilogram of sponge. What we're really looking for when we're doing our drug discovery is inspiration. We just want to get the original structures and their corresponding biological activity. So really we have no impact at all in the environment. And ultimately, if something's going to become a drug, it has to actually be synthesized in the laboratory. So that's the next step of development. But nature really provides the inspiration for these drugs, and the effects are tangible.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And also, I want to say to the rest of the panelists, if you have any specific examples, because you all have a lot of experience in very different fields and different places, please bring them in. I think we will help the audience as well understand a little bit more specifically what you're thinking. Greg, would you like to finish this question?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's lots of examples, and the first thing that comes to my mind for benefits is the primary use of wild relatives is to discover disease-resistant traits. So, as you know, we're actually working on looking for disease resistance in cannabis for powdery mildew, but this has been done many times. Previously, I worked in tomatoes, so there's a lot of virus resistance, for example, that have come from wild tomato accessions. And this translates to less pesticide use. Usually viruses are insect transmitted. So you use insecticides to kill the insects so you don't get the viruses. Basically means there's less insecticides in the environment and on your plate, which is very nice. And it also makes food more affordable. So that's pretty clear. I definitely would rather live in a world with those resistance genes around than not. You know, the big one that plant breeders are trying to tackle now is to use these wild relatives to help on abiotic stresses. So that's heat and drought and flooding and frost, and essentially the effects of climate change. And I know that there's some projects going on like that at Genome Canada as well. To benefit BC, BC's a bit of an anomaly in Canada in some ways, because it, essentially forestry dwarfs agriculture, right? At least in my mind, when I think about, my field of work, it's about, what are the big acres out there in the landscape, and it's forestry, and the need for diverse forests to me is so apparent, especially in the face of climate change, right? So we're planting forests now that are scheduled to be harvested out in 2040, 2050. So are we being very smart about what we're planting, what ecosystems we're putting in place to face the next 30 or 40 years, right? Another area that I can't help but think about, and one of the other reasons why how BC is unique is it actually is, I would say, not super rich in crop wild relatives, right? There's not a ton. There's no grasslands where all the wild relatives for all the grains and pulses and things would be living. The thing that we do have, and there's also, for example, not many big fruit trees or nut trees that are also important wild relatives in the rest of North America. But there is a lot of berries. And I can't help but think of, some of my favorite summertime snacks, which would be thimbleberries or the native blackberry or some of the huckleberries, are not grown anywhere. So maybe there's opportunities there for improving those. And this is something that's not going to really change the math for the BC economy at large, but certainly could change math for some farmers or some communities. But I'd be interested if Kelly, especially if you have thoughts. I know all those berries are very important First Nations people, and how, what systems or processes would have to be involved in that And actually kind of have a question for Raymond, if you don't mind me double dipping, which is one of the, on a similar thread, which is, if you're collecting material from all around the world, is there any mechanisms in plant breeding? It's been an ongoing thing to try to figure out how do you incentivize protecting biodiversity by essentially getting money back out to the places where things have come from, right? So if you're using whatever corn land races that were collected in Mexico, should there be kickback to the farmers and communities that came from?
I love that question. So I'll leave it to Raymond and Kelly, and I'm sure Federica will have things to share as well. Please.
I mean, I can address the issue of giving back if you want. I mean, natural products themselves have no intrinsic value. They're really just of academic value, and most of that research is done in academia. Where the value comes from is in the development. And so every place we've collected, we always make the local population development partners, so that we would share equally in any revenues that came from our work, basically. And as a result of that drug that I was just talking about, we've returned revenues back to the University of Papua New Guinea in sufficient amounts that they were able to build themselves on their campus a natural products chemistry lab. And also they've given it back to the villagers who live along the shoreline where we collected. And again, it's like you're saying, that incentivizes them to protect the biodiversity because they start to see value in it. Quite apart from the fact that, if you're developing drugs that are saving people around the world, that's also just got inherent value. But I agree with you. I think that you have to be, that's part of the consideration. And UBC actually, through our work, was one of the first universities anywhere to actually give money back to a source country for this sort of bioprospecting. So we believe in that strongly.
Can I ask just to build on that, Raymond, because I'm curious, and I was reading some of the early work that you did in Papua New Guinea and how these agreements have been used by others as well as examples. Why isn't that a more common practice?
I think now it's a completely common practice. When we started, nobody was doing it. Okay, people would just go basically as tourists, and they would collect marine organisms. They would take them back. They would develop the compounds, and they would never talk to the countries. But we, as part of my research, I mean, whenever we work with people as collaborators, we always make them equal partners in any development we do. And I guess I just saw the source organisms and the people who helped us collect those organisms as equal partners. And so we developed this. But then shortly after that, NIH developed a bunch of programs called National Cooperative Drug Development and Discovery Groups, basically. And they put in place mandatory agreements like we had. And so I think now it's pretty much universal. Anybody who does this sort of collecting has some kind of revenue sharing agreement in place, basically. And I think there's also, as part of that, there's also a lot of work to emphasize the protection of the biodiversity. I mean, that's part of the work that we do as well.
Great. Federica, would you like to go next to build on the...
Raymond, this is fantastic, what you are saying, and it's great. I'm working 7 years with developing country, particularly in South America, for bioprospecting, where we built economic cluster exactly to drive the economy growth of the country based on their own heritage and biodiversity. I will tell you that it's not the case, that I have witnessed places like East Africa or South America. There is also plenty that goes unrecognized. There is also plenty that is exploited because of lack, I think, of not just at the local level, but also national and international strategies, really, to understand this benefit sharing. And with our democratization of being able to generate genetic information and having now accessible through all of these global databases, it has become really blurry, and one of the things that, and so I do think that, we have the Nagoya Protocol. It's quite complex. Canada in itself, for example, is not ratified the Nagoya Protocol now, and so I think we need to do better, actually. But it's absolutely fantastic to hear you say what you are saying about what happened with the New Guinea collaboration that you had and the fact that you were able to build capacity there, because that is essentially out of the four goals that came out of the biodiversity framework from COP15. One of the major goals was capacity building, exactly in the vein of benefit sharing. So I just wanted to say that. And then one thing that I want to mention, it seems that we are all kind of connected, it seems to me, through the need to catalog a large amount of biodiversity for the future. for using it in many different ways that will be beneficial for the future. So here, again, going back to Kelly, I think the word of responsibility is so important, because making I think marginalized community, indigenous community that actually live and biodiversity is part very much of their culture or their everyday. Everything is extremely important for our sustainability, I would say. So but this cataloging of this information, there isn't very much opportunity. It's something that I from my line of work, we struggle very much. So you mentioned, Georgia, that I'm the chair of the Earth Biogenome Project, this global entity that has brought together projects that are in fact aiming at sequencing the genomes of all the diversity of species, for more medicines of the future, for more product, for economic growth, for greener solutions, for all of the things that you can imagine. But actually we struggle because it's not a priority, first of all, at the political level. It also is a lot of what we do right now, particularly due to our pressing challenges, very based on short-term goals, and we need a longer-term strategy. So what Greg was saying, I love what he was saying, we need a long-term strategy with this biodiversity, and for some reason we haven't been able to really get this attention on how important it is that we begin to responsibly bank this information for a variety of activities. So this cataloging is so, I love that it came out, because it's been something that is very important for what we do.
Thank you, Federica. Kelly, would you respond? And there's also the, you can bring in the international experience that you have, but of course, working with indigenous communities as well. And Greg had that component in his question. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts, and thank you, everyone. This is a really great conversation. I wanted to first really respect Ray's work over the years. I mean, I go back. I have a publication here, 1990s. Commercial use of biodiversity, and back in the day, more than 20 years ago, what Ray's lab and approach today, that was not common, and there was tremendous international unrest and backlash about the way that biodiversity prospecting was being conducted in this very extractive way, ignoring a lot of times in those days based on traditional knowledge of indigenous communities, and over the years and through local to international levels, a lot of progress was made. Here's one, San Hudia, the benefit sharing agreement that Frederica had talked about through our Convention of Biodiversity, Article 8J, our access to benefit sharing work, etc. So a lot of progress has been made, but there's still sort of a lot to go, I guess. And what often gets left out of the equation as we look for all the beneficial compounds, and which we need to do, and Ray's a great example of that. These new drugs that are helping save lives. This is incredible. But at the same time, how do we not lose sight of other dimensions of biodiversity? Here's another 1990s favorite from Daryl Posey, cultural and spiritual values of biodiversity. And that dimension often is lost as we, even as we well-intentioned seek to catalog, to know the biodiversity, to benefit from biodiversity. I heard Greg say the word systems, and that's what I thought, oh yeah, systems of biodiversity, living systems exist, and there's all sorts of interplay and the integrity of supporting those systems to exist is the sustainable future, so that we might take components and benefit from those, but no component of a system, even if it's not seen as beneficial to us humans, no component is expendable within the systems, the broader, the larger ecological systems. And I think that's a message that needs to accompany this important work as we, promote the unlocking the potential of biodiversity. We can't just be kind of cherry picking bits and pieces without understanding the effect, the integrity of the systems as a whole, and therefore our chance to benefit in the future. So I really agree with Frederica that Canada's done a pretty crappy job. We've tried so hard in so many ways, but the resources have not gone into this topic and to the good people within government and other agencies that have been working in this regard. Took us a long time to, like she mentioned, takes us a long time to ratify anything, it seems, and then enact, to bring into being, what does it mean to adopt UNDRIP or a Nagoya? Come on, let's go. So there's a lot of Canada's very maybe considerate and therefore slow about moving, but in a way we could be a world leader, and in a way we end up being really behind because of some kind of maybe very conservative pace at moving through these kinds of agreements and enacting. But I feel very hopeful at this time within BC and within the country. And my hope is due to a combination of ethical conduct that's becoming more the norm, like Ray's lab and we're hearing about, as well as the Indigenous and local community voices that are being listened to, maybe under the banner of reconciliation. But there seems like there's a little bit more political opening and openness among the politicians and wider society to hear beyond just a Western scientific or Western society's kind of approach to these topics. So I feel hopeful and grateful for this conversation.
Thank you, and thank you, Greg, for the original question. I think this opened up a very nice exchange between you. So you've touched on a few aspects of the questions I had in mind, but just to make sure there isn't anything else that we missed. So I had a question about equitable distribution of benefits and how can we really have that. You all touched on this, but I just wanted to open up and see if you have any more thoughts on this topic. When we're talking about benefiting from biodiversity and having an equitable distribution, you talked about the agreements, especially about the international work. But I was just wondering if anyone has any extra thoughts on this before we move forward.
Maybe I'll just comment that it is
Please.
something that I have struggled with. With sunflowers being one of the few exceptions. So all wild sunflowers are in America, right? That's the key bit. With that one exception, almost all of the important wild relatives to the staple crops that make up all of our diet are in developing countries. And to my knowledge, there's no kickback for that. There's systems in place, there's protocols to be ratified, but my understanding is that it's not really working. So I think it's important to recognize that the cost of the food that we get at the grocery store doesn't reflect that, right? It's essentially not equitable.
I mean, I could just share one other anecdote with you about this business of returning revenues back to a source country, and Papua New Guinea is a good example. When we first decided to do this, the idea was to give it back to the university and our collaborators at the university, and they would give it back to the people in the local communities. So once there was funds available, and it was a significant amount of funds, it actually sat in the bank at UBC for about 5 years. Well, the people in Papua New Guinea actually figured out how to get it to the right place. The government just wanted to take it and put it into general revenues. They didn't want to put it back to the people that you're talking about, the local villagers, and back to the university and things like that. So that's also an issue. If all of a sudden a flood of benefits comes back to some of these countries, they don't necessarily have the infrastructure to figure out themselves how to distribute it in a fair way so it benefits all of the country, and maybe not just one select group of people that are just going to take the money and use it for some other purpose. It's something that people don't talk about much because it really hasn't, this process hasn't been done much, but it's another part of the equation that the work has to be done on that end as well for equitable sharing.
That's very interesting. I'll just add, I was just thinking while you were saying this, Raymond, that basically if in that country there are high inequalities, then giving back resources without any conditions, it might contribute to further increasing that inequality. If there is no system in place to accept those benefits. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Federica?
Yeah, George, I just wanted to add on this question that you've just asked the last, because it is a little bit something I'm really been interested in. I just wanted to reiterate, I think with regard to equitable sharing, for me, as a genomicist, it means the sharing of the digital information and whatever use you might be able to do from that digital information. And so I go back that I really do believe we need to do better at the level of national and international policies to do this. And clearly, Raymond has told us that at the local level, there are some great examples, but we need to take it a little bit step further and really come to an agreement, because unfortunately, it's not like that everywhere. So we need, these policies need to be really recognized and in line with the Convention on Biological Diversity, with the Nagoya Protocol, and many countries are doing this. And some of these developing countries, I've particularly been working a lot with some of the South American countries. They're actually doing extraordinarily well. And in some cases, for example, in Colombia, I would say they know how to benefit share with their indigenous populations so well. There are mechanisms and much better than what I have observed, for example, in some cases in the US, and I've only been in Canada for 2 years, so I'm not going to, but so I think that it's extremely important to consider these policies. I go back to ways of doing this, and that is there's the monetary, the financial incentive that need to go back, like Raymond has said, or the capacity building. It's one way to do it, but also there's no monetary benefits. I have worked very closely with indigenous nations in Colombia, in particularly two of them, and I was astonished that when we sat down over the course of several years and asked the question, what exactly this, right? We were trying to understand this benefit sharing at a more sort of detailed level, and ask the question, what it's important to you, what kind of monetary benefit it's important to you. And we, at that point, we were thinking, we can help them build ecotourism model, business model. And the answer back was, we would like to learn what you know. And the answer was stunning from the chief of it basically was, you know and everything about our world. You come, you go to your lab, you do stuff that you're telling us is useful and it's important. We don't understand how that is. How do we learn that? So that's really a message that I've heard over and over and over across countries. So non-monetary benefits are also important.
I'd love to just build on that as well. Thank you for that great example, Frederica. And way back in the day, NIH funded bioprospecting project, big one in the US. I was asked to come in and do some work talking to the communities about kind of doing an evaluation, and it was in Peru that the work took place. And the details don't matter, but in the end, there was a big the project proponents really prided themselves in the benefit sharing arrangements that they had committed to. And back in the day, that it was significant. But in talking to the community partners, they were receiving benefits such as training in herbarium specimen preparation, training in some of the, being able to tag along and have short-term work opportunities to accompany the researchers in the work. When we asked them what kind of benefits would be beneficial, they said, well, what would be beneficial to us would be to learn English, because then we would have more job opportunities. So it's the benefits, like who benefits is a great question, but what are the benefits that would be beneficial is an even better question that we don't always assume to ask. We don't always ask. We often are assuming what those benefits are from our perspective. And I think, we need to be asking those questions. And those benefits, the most beneficial benefits might not be direct. They may be indirect. They may be longer term. And they certainly may not have to be monetary, but they may. And if they are monetary, as Ray points out, there also needs to be a responsibility on the proponent to ensure that there's some kind of infrastructure to receive those monetary benefits and then distribute them in the way intended, because that's not always the case as well. So I think we need to kind of probe deeper and deeper into the questions to really enable the good intentions to do some good.
Great, thank you. First, before we move to the next question, I'll just remind the audience about the Q&A function. So please send any questions you have. I have a few more questions, and we could go all the way till the end with the questions I have prepared, but we would prefer to have your questions and see what you're interested in. So please send your questions through the Q&A function. So Kelly, you already talked about this, but I was wondering if you want an opportunity to go a little bit deeper about the ethical dilemmas and the different perspectives around benefiting from biodiversity. Before this panel, when we met, we were talking a bit about twilight seeing. Would you like to offer any more thoughts on this? I just want to make sure we don't miss this opportunity.
Yeah, actually, could I invite you into a tiny exercise in the two-eyed seeing spirit? I'll just invite everybody to close one of your eyes. If you have two eyes that are working, close one of them and put out your fingers in front of you and try to, with one eye closed, have your two pointer fingers touch and see what happens. Do they touch with one eye closed, or do they kind of miss? And if you have a little bit of trouble there, that's the norm, because we actually don't have the same depth perception with one eye versus two eyes. And so I think this is a little exercise that was just shared with me a few days ago at an Indigenous gathering that I attended. And I really love the simplicity of it to remind us about if we're only looking from one perspective, say a Western scientific or Western worldview or Western, even Western ethics, then what is it that we're missing? And not only what depth are we missing, and not only that, how might we misalign with all the good intentions? So I guess that's what I would maybe bring up as the one contribution to this question of ethical dilemmas and different perspectives. I really think that we need to do a better job in diversifying our perspectives, which needs to involving more people who hold more diverse perspectives, Indigenous and otherwise, different worldviews, so that we're not missing things, so that when we're asking questions and having conversations around something like biodiversity or benefits, that we're not assuming what we mean and then maybe getting off on a disconnected path right from the beginning. So we still need to do a lot more work on that, and we need to continue to refresh and remind ourselves that that's part of the work, is including diverse perspectives. I think the some of the ethical dilemmas Ray spoke to, the over-harvesting or overuse or depleting biodiversity. That's an ongoing dilemma, I think, of any of this. And these days, as he mentioned, if something nature's inspiring, the new possibilities for compounds and chemicals, and then the work is done in the lab. So that's really great. But at the same time, as we know, there's the primary research, which might be commercializing something pharmaceutical or some kind of drug discovery. However, in the lay population, there's all sorts of other kinds of industries that are inspired as well, that don't necessarily have regulations or ethical standards, and could lead to, when people hear, maybe not the sponge, because that's a little harder to get, harder to come by, but when people hear of something that has benefit, there's all these other industries that happen around, and can lead to over harvesting, or could lead to harvesting in areas that, as somebody else mentioned, are of cultural significance and value, or traditional harvesting places of indigenous communities or local communities elsewhere. So there's a whole bunch of sort of nested concerns that we will miss if we pursue these endeavors just along sort of the Western scientific mentality, using Western legal systems and Western ethics as our guide. So my encouragement is we need to branch out and continue to never think that we've got it figured out. We have to continue to return back and revisit these other perspectives, other bodies of wisdom that encourage us to understand ourselves as interconnected to all life forms and responsible to Mother Earth. I could go on a long time, but I won't.
Beautiful, thank you. I know we can probably have another panel discussion only on this topic. So I'd like to switch gears. We've talked a bit about commercialization, and Kelly, you just mentioned a few aspects, and I was just curious, for those who try to do it in a responsible way and they have identified opportunities, what are some of the challenges for industry in this area? So I was just curious, and perhaps we can start with Greg, and then Raymond, and then Federica. So from the industry's perspectives, which are some of the challenges that come top of mind for commercializing in a responsible way?
I mean, for using wild relatives in plant breeding, the biggest problem by a mile is it's very slow. I'm sure Raymond can sympathize with that. I think the timelines for drug development is even longer, but yeah, it's a super slow process. The more wild the thing is, the longer it takes to sort of be refined into something useful. Yeah, I mean, that's really the number one, and it essentially means we use less diversity than we otherwise could, right? If resources weren't limited, if we had all the time in the world, then our crops would essentially be more diverse, right? We would have more compelling reasons to grow more different things, and there'd be more diversity within the things. And I think that would be beneficial to both we'll call them farm ecosystems, and also to people, right? With cheaper, more affordable, healthier food. Yeah, there's a bunch of secondary ones, but the speed is the biggest one for plant breeding.
Thank you, Greg. Raymond?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, most of the major pharmaceutical companies have stopped their natural product drug discovery programs because they don't fit within the metrics of drug discovery nowadays, right? It's too uncertain, right? First off, you have to purify the compounds by assay-guided fractionation, takes too long. And you can't give the stockholders, the shareholders in the company, any metrics about how many leads you're going to have, how many compounds you're going to have in clinical trials at the end of 1 year. And so it just doesn't fit within that paradigm. So I think the discovery of natural products drugs is still going on, but it's done in academic labs, because this type of research is very good for academics. These are perfect PhD programs, right? And then what you need is, what's happening is that academics like myself, if they have a compound that they think really has drug potential, they spin off a company. They start a little biotech company. And ultimately that biotech company can raise venture capital, get the compound to the point where either we know it's going to work in humans or not. And at that point, it's bought out or transferred to a large pharmaceutical company that actually has the capability of marketing it and turning it into a real commercial enterprise, right? So there are opportunities, but the opportunities, like I say, are kind of spun out of academic environments where somebody discovers a really interesting compound. And every compound, every drug that's ever gone to clinic has to have a champion. And the best champions for natural products are natural products chemists. And a few of us are entrepreneurial, most aren't. And so a lot of them just fall by the wayside. There's no large company, major company. If you could publish the structure of the most exciting natural product lead compound that's ever been discovered, if you just publish it in a paper and you don't do anything to push it, it'll just be a nice academic paper. Read the literature and say, there's a compound that we should invest hundreds of millions of dollars into develop into a drug. It needs a champion.
Raymond can also ask, or Greg can also jump in. When you say, both of you said that it's very slow, just I'm thinking, for helping the audience, what timeline are you thinking, or what is the difference with other ways of producing those drugs?
Greg, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I always think of and it's funny you mentioned PhD projects, because of course my PhD project was bringing in genetic diversity from wild sunflowers into domesticated sunflower with the intention of looking for drought and heat tolerance. And we had some promising leads, but obviously left work in sunflowers, and those sunflower lines have gone out to industry now almost 8 years ago. And I know that they're working on it. It could be sort of lack of a champion, as you sort of mentioned, but only now-ish, 8 years after myself working on them for 4 years, so 12 years total from the first crosses, now-ish is when I'd expect to see something come out of it or not. So 10 to 15 years, is very, very typical from the initial cross to something going for evaluations in a farmer's field, not even for commercial scale growing. And to my knowledge, nobody's commercialized anything for my sunflower lines yet. So that could be because they just don't like them, or because they're still working on them and they're in that long timeline.
Yeah, so I guess if I talk about natural product development, the issue with natural products, as I said, we collect very small amounts of material to get inspiration, but then you have to figure out how to make this on an industrial scale. And natural products have very complex structures. So even once you've identified a potential hit, you have to figure out how to make this complex molecule in hundreds of maybe a ton or more of material, pure material, right? This is a very challenging process that takes years. Whereas what the drug companies normally do is they've got these chemical libraries of simple compounds that medicinal chemists have made over the years, and they just screen these things. And they already know how to make them. And when they get a hit in their assays, they already know what the structure is. With natural products, you screen crude extracts. So, there's something in there that might be interesting, but first you have to purify it, not trivial. Then you have to solve its structure, not trivial. Then you have to figure out how to synthesize it or make it on a large scale. So all these things take time. The drug I just told you about that was just given orphan status, we isolated that from the sponge. We collected the sponge probably in the late 1980s, before 1990. We published the structure sometime in the early 1990s. Then it took us a few years to make a bunch of synthetic analogs and yada, 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 right? And so now what are we? We're 30 years later. So this is they're not all that slow, but it is slow, time-consuming work. And like I say, it's well suited to academia, because these are all nice little projects for academic projects where nobody really cares so much about the planet. You're not trying to satisfy shareholders. You're just trying to do good science that might lead somewhere. But shareholders demand quick results, right? And that's why the drug companies have gone away from it. It's just pure business.
George, I'll put a plug in from the developing countries with this from this lens of the industry. I mean, it's really interesting because I echo, but navigating the lengthy regulatory frameworks as well is a huge bottleneck. My work in South America was because of the being biodiverse, and so with the idea of building helping the country build bioeconomy clusters for bioprospecting, because that's with everything with our loss of biodiversity, our next medicines, our next future is harbored in these countries. And so there is a tremendous amount, not just of biodiversity and resources, but knowledge on how to spin off these companies that Raymond is talking about. And I've seen so many that it's unbelievable, using their products from the Amazon and all sorts of things. One of the issue is to the capacity. So it would be really great if the Western countries had a mechanisms to actually partner with developing country to solve to accelerate some of these issues and have some more some easier strategies to navigate. But one of it is the capacity. So there's lots of products can be discovered, initial processing, but many of the the facility that needs the scale up, the synthetic biology facility, all of these things, they are not present in this country. So how can we then use what's outside the country, obviously protecting, once again, right, the benefit sharing and all of that. And the other issue is even the regulatory framework, because if there is a company that spins off and has discovered one of these companies called Ecoflora, and I had the pleasure to visit them and see what they were doing, discovering new food that dies. They have to wait years for getting regulatory approval. And the only way for them to do it is through the US system, and at those costs as well. So there's so much opportunity lost and no framework to really encourage this type of activity across borders.
Thank you. I saw we have some questions in the Q&A. I'll just remind the audience to send your questions there. We'll get into them in a little bit. Before we move also to the next question, I believe our host from CSPC have a poll for the audience. So if they could just pull it up now before we move to the questions. I believe people have answered, so we can move to the next question. Building on the last comments you had there, in terms of the issues of industry and some of the capacity issues as well, I was just curious to hear your thoughts about the role of government in this. And I'm thinking as a public policy person, and it's also in my work at GenomeBC to look at policy. What do you think the role of government is in ensuring that we benefit from biodiversity, I would say, in an equitable way? And you can answer, so we'll go, you can all answer this. And of course, it's a big question, and there are different aspects, so you can focus on the sort of commercialization aspect or the ethical aspect, or it's totally up to you. So what is the role of government in benefiting from the diversity? And we can start with perhaps Greg, and then Kelly, Raymond, and Federica.
Yeah, I made a bit of a list for this one, different things, but by a long stretch, the number one is to protect it, right? Protecting biodiversity and a lot of, I think, the commercialization and equity, like those things to me, kind of can be used to support the protection piece. But, I hope it goes without saying, we don't get it back, right? If we lose it, it's gone forever, right? And that is a single gene in a sponge that might be useful for medicine, or it could be, a single allele in one population of wild blueberries that gives you disease resistance for some up and coming pathogen in blueberry production. So, yeah, protect it. I don't think I want to say anything other than that, to not dilute the importance of it.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, just building on that, I think that government has a unique role and responsibility to be considering all the different dimensions. Protection is one, as Greg mentioned, but there's these economic considerations. There's these obligations that both the province and the feds have under UNDRIP with legislation. There's promises regarding reconciliation. There's different social, cultural kinds of dimensions, and government is in provincially and federally quite a siloed kind of endeavor. And I think in terms of benefiting from biodiversity, we really need to have an entity that's really diligently coordinating the different dimensions, so that we don't have these siloed endeavors that are disconnected, where economic pursuits are disconnected from environmental protection kind of pursuits, and they're disconnected from protecting the rights and responsibilities of Indigenous communities, for example. So I think government has some work to do to integrate and coordinate a number of different initiatives, both provincially and federally. And I think that we as academics and spin-off industry partners and all the rest, nonprofit sectors, I'm sure there's lots of people in different sectors of society involved. We all have unique perspectives and experiences that we could put forward and to the government and help government see what their role is, but what's missing, what are the gaps, so that we can have a more integrated, coordinated response when it comes to biodiversity as a topic.
Thank you. Raymond?
Yeah, good question. I guess in Canada, there's never been a focused government research funding for this type of research for natural product drug discovery. So most of my research over the years actually has been funded by NIH in the States, because they had a very focused program. And Kelly referred to this, so you were probably a part of these NCDDG programs, or they've had several major funding initiatives where basically it was focused on natural product drug discovery. Canada's never had anything like that. And as a result, it's very difficult to get this kind of research funded in Canada. So, they could fund basic research. If you do find a compound, then, the government can provide funding for this sort of desert, they call it, between having a compound and getting it to the point where you've got enough information, you could attract venture capital or something, or spin off a company. So I guess that would be my major concern, really. I mean, Canada's doing some of that other part, this sort of funding, taking compounds from the point where they look interesting to being viable for a startup, but basic research, not much. No.
Federica?
Yes, so I have obviously legislation and policies. We talked about that. I was going to say funding and resources, and Raymond nailed it. Not just in terms of grants, there can be other mechanisms as well. But obviously, I would say probably what this panel is doing today as well, and what the government responsibility should be, and maybe everyone's responsibilities, is raise public awareness on this more, and education in this area. I think these are extremely important. And maybe the government can also help bring to develop a mechanism to bring all of the stakeholders together. Like we've been talking a lot about how holistic this area is. We've been talking about communities, we've been talking about scientists, we've been talking about industry. Maybe more opportunity for these stakeholders to be engaged, to be engaging with each other. Could be also, I think, there's no reason why it shouldn't be also a government responsibility. And from my perspective, international cooperation is a must.
Absolutely. So just to build on that, actually, Federica, I want to ask you. We mentioned the word climate change a couple of times. I think you and I think it was someone else as well. And I was just curious, why do you think climate change has made it to the political agenda? You were also at COP15, and there are resources for that. There are government programs, but arguably biodiversity hasn't done the same, to the same extent at least. What do you think is missing? Is it the narrative? Is it the word biodiversity, that it's too broad, as we said at the beginning? Is it a government priority?
Yeah.
And if someone else has thoughts as well, please jump in.
It'd be interesting to know what the other panelists' thoughts on this is, because I don't have the answer, but it's a question I've been asking myself. I thought a couple of things could be the reason. Perhaps the narrative, because really what we now have the climate pressure, and we need to build an economy that is low carbon and green and sustainable. We use these words always, but there is an implication in that comes with protecting our environment. It cannot be done at the exclusion, but for some reason, it's not part of the narrative. It's not part of the narrative. It continues to not be part of the narrative. In consequences, is people like ourselves on this panel struggle with moving forward this area. Could it be? And so I don't know, maybe it's a narrative, maybe it's what somebody just said. I don't know if it was Kelly or somebody said about better coordination. Maybe it's a lack of coordination, and so we sort of kind of we're losing sort of the forest for the trees. I am not sure. But I think this is it. We need to really switch this around.
Yeah, it's interesting. The topic of coordination was mentioned in a few different ways today, and I think that's interesting. Sorry, Kelly, I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Just building on what Frederica said, and also just with an eye to one of the questions that said would be nice if Indigenous or marginalized communities members could be on a panel like this. And I think that's really relevant. I wish as well, this was a little bit short for me in terms of being invited in and coordinated, but I had that thought, could I invite one of my Indigenous mentors or colleagues to accompany me and be on the Zoom screen as well. That just didn't turn out to be possible because of timing, but I really do encourage that, and I want to uphold the person in the Q&A who suggested this, because I think we need to hear directly from those who can speak from more diverse perspectives, so that we can so we can understand better what we're missing. And in terms of biodiversity being kind of the younger sibling of climate change and kind of tagging alongside, even though biodiversity loss has been more of a known phenomenon for maybe longer than climate change, I would argue. What an interesting phenomenon. But when we have, say, our Indigenous wisdom holders prepared to share about a different perspective and a different approach and a different body of wisdom, when they can come to the forefront and speak for themselves, I think that is one of the most transformative change opportunities that I've experienced. We need to hear for ourselves from those speaking directly from those bodies of wisdom that can catalyze some shift in mindset, shift in understanding that can then affect changes in decisions about priorities of whether it's funding or political will or what to do about these things. So I really encourage that, diversifying who's sitting at these tables and able to speak for themselves.
Maybe I'll give a fairly cynical answer to, why climate's getting attention and biodiversity is not, and that would be that it's relatively straightforward to monetize electric cars and heat pumps, but not to do the same for, songbird habitat.
Yeah, I think that is something we've heard over and over again. And also, I mean, for myself as a social scientist, I think perhaps the answer to that might be there, that we might need more social science research into building that side of the argument, hopefully. Also, I want to comment, since Kelly, I was planning to touch on the question from the audience right after the question, but since you mentioned, I just want to say kudos for asking that question, and we definitely try to include Indigenous perspectives or people themselves if they can attend. At GenomeBC, we also have other events through the Genomics Society team, where I am also data and other teams, and we try to do that as well. Okay, so
George,
I'll remind. Please.
Can I just add to, because you said having social scientists sort of in the mix as well, and I'll just add one more in the spirit of what you just said, and Indigenous scientists. That Indigenous science is a whole different perspective, a whole different approach to science. And again, I've said the same thing a number of times, but in order for us to really understand that responsibility piece and the reciprocity piece, I think we need to be also welcoming science that's done in different ways, and so that we can all be learners in that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll just add another plug about us at GenomeBC. We just finished. We can announce the results for a little bit longer, but we just finished the societal issues competition that we have, which focused on fisheries here in BC. And we're very excited that we received some projects, and some of them were approved, that combine genomics, social sciences, and Indigenous research and representation from First Nations. And they will be starting very soon. So we're very excited about this. Federica, did you want to add something? I saw you unmuted.
Just to complete this wonderful conversation, I think I have to pick up from where Greg left. I mean, that was cynical, but I think it holds a lot of truth. And there's another area that I am very keen and I have been advocating for is sort of a switch for moving away for governments to basically just look at our economic value based on the GDP, and actually begin to take the natural world as a capital as well. Now, we know there's many approaches that are being developed and some economists are leading in this, but it's not something that anybody at the moment is really willing to bring to the table or to shout out but it's so important to possibly have all of these really that we've been talking about really happen, because otherwise it's just we no longer have. We need value for those ecosystem services. We need value for our biodiversity. Unless we put a value on it, then, and the natural accounting and the classical accounting based on GPT just doesn't cut it.
Absolutely. So moving to the next question and slowly making to the end as well. I was just curious, you all have international experience in different sectors, different perspectives. So I was just curious if you could choose one thing that you've seen or you've learned internationally and could be applied in BC, what would it be? What is the one lesson that you could bring back here? And perhaps we can start with Raymond, and then Federica and Kelly and Greg, if you want, you can jump in as well at the end.
That's a tough question. I mean, I guess what I would say really, we've looked at biodiversity from all around the world, and including British Columbia. Okay. And I guess I would just say that we have wonderful opportunities here. We recently did a screen looking for anti-COVID drugs. And we looked at 500 pure natural products that we collected from all over the world, from my lab and from some other collaborators. And we came up with 3 wonderful lead structures, and they all came from BC organisms. One was from a bacteria collected on a lichen out at Pitt Meadows. Another came from a sponge collected in Howe Sound. And the third one came from a bacteria collected in Barkley Sound. And these really blew away anything else that we collected from all over the world. So I guess I would just make the point that our biodiversity here is a very rich potential source of pharmaceuticals if you know how to look and where to look.
That's exciting. Kelly, would you like to go next, and then Federica?
I need you to repeat the question. Sorry, George.
Sorry, so I was just curious about international examples, right? So you've all done work in different capacities internationally. So if you could bring back to BC one lesson, what would it be? Something that you've seen that worked well.
Yeah, I think for me, there's some kind of consolation as well as maybe concern for me that what we've spoken about and some of the issues that I've tried to raise, or the considerations, ethical consideration I've tried to raise, they're not just here, and they're not just local. They're international. They're ongoing. They've been going on a long time, and so people, Indigenous and local knowledge holders all over the world have been weighing in on these biodiversity values and for a long time, for decades. And that's concerning because we still haven't listened enough, and we haven't kind of addressed and resolved a lot of these dilemmas. But it's also exciting because I think that some of the most helpful inspirations and tips and advice are long lasting and there and already shared, and Indigenous people are still willing to share other kinds of perspectives that can help us get to a different place with how we're treating biodiversity and how we're valuing biodiversity, and in order to continue to have biodiversity flourish rather than continue to decline. So I think for me, it's hopeful that there's wisdom out there for us to tap into, being generously offered, and it's up to us to figure out that way to listen and to open up to this. So whether it's from at home, our elders across the way, or from elders across the world, I think that's exciting that opportunity is there for us, and we need to find that way to tune our ears to listen.
Beautiful. Federica, would you like to go next?
No, I'm just going to give a perspective from a funding agency, given that I represent Genome BC as a chief scientific officer as well. I think one of the things I learned internationally and is two things that are particularly important to me at the moment, and that is when tackling challenges or trying to find solution to major challenges, whether that be climate change, biodiversity loss, and so on, is that we, through the pandemic especially, was really reinforced, but we have known this for a long while, but it particularly reinforced that we really need a multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary approach to this. And so really to see programs, which I do know, for example, other countries have led in recent time, and I think the success and the impacts are there to be seen, is to encourage this as well, this big multidisciplinarity into the project. And then the second thing, and with that multidisciplinarity includes also the involvement, of course, of traditional knowledge and all of that. But and then the second thing is perhaps one of the things that I appreciated coming into Canada is that it has a tremendous potential to lead in a number of ways. And I just wish that from a funding point of view, there will be more opportunity for high risk, but at the same time, high reward type of research endeavors, really. And that's the two things that come up in mind.
Thank you. Greg, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'd really love to point to examples around the world about, creating new crops whole cloth out of wild plants, but unfortunately there's not a ton. There's a few cases, but it doesn't feel very international. The thing I'll tell you about is where I worked last was in California, right? So not super far away. But the thing that is constantly on my mind, and it comes up every summer now, is forest management and fire management. And California, is a very good example of what not to do, right? So their forest industry is largely based on research from the 40s and 50s. Again, they kicked off forests 30, 40 years ago without thinking about the future, right? They largely, not entirely, but are monocultures of forests, and they completely abandoned indigenous knowledge, right? So the wildfire versus forest fire thing, controlled burn, like that whole system is just cast aside for these, a little bit more board feet per acre. So that I think is a very, very clear example for BC to learn from, what not to do, but something that affects the whole province in a very real way.
That's important for sure. So we're almost there. So perhaps I'll just ask for your last thoughts. I just want to make sure I'll give you another opportunity if there are any final thoughts on what people should know, perhaps. I assume people at the audience have very different and diverse levels of understanding and perspectives. Perhaps some of them would like to know a bit more about this area of work. So just curious if you have any final thoughts in terms of what people can do. And I see also we have the feedback. Also, perhaps let's wait for a minute. I was hoping to do that after, but perhaps the audience can do the feedback poll first.
Maybe as the audience is doing feedback, could we respond to the other question that was posed about does bioprospecting ever include priorities of local community?
Please.
And
Please go ahead.
I don't know directly about bioprospecting, but I know I know that is really common in ethnobiology, the background that I have, and in some other disciplines, that the point might not be looking for drugs or commercializable products, but there is a lot of community-based and community-guided research that goes on meant to address community priorities. And one that I might just like to bring up, because it's a Canadian example, is one at University of Montreal, led by a team that was funded by the CIHR, and Pierre Haddad is the PI, and they worked with Cree communities on looking at traditional Cree medicines for anti-diabetic compounds. And the work was really highly funded over a long period of time to allow the relationships and all the kind of good relationship building and working through all the things that come up when you're trying to work across cultures and across worldviews and across different backgrounds. So I don't know that Ray might say these are guided by community priorities in terms of his work, but I think that there are a lot of increasing examples out there where, and I think that's really an important thing to do, especially when we're talking about Indigenous and local communities, that the research agenda isn't imposed, but how can the research agenda serve the communities and their priorities and values? So that's another way, returning back to the benefits. How can we benefit from biodiversity? Well, we can ensure that the explorations are guided by community priorities so that the benefits will naturally be in that direction as well.
Great, thank you, and thank you for touching on that comment. So perhaps we'll go Raymond first, and then Federica, Kelly, and Greg, if you have any final thoughts before we close for today.
Okay, maybe I'll just follow up on that comment, Kelly, because a lot of what we do lately has been working with groups in Thailand that are looking at Thai traditional medicines. And, you know, their focus in terms of what kind of drugs they're interested in are really based on the local populations and what they need. Again, a lot of drugs for diabetes and other things like that. So, yeah, no, I believe in that. It's just, yeah, I mean, we haven't done a lot of that in our own research. I mean, a little bit maybe, but I support that. I think that's a good approach.
Federica, any final thoughts? We're just on time.
No, not much other than just to follow up on this. I think clearly this co-development, this co-creation part is so important, particularly going back to the multi-sectoral aspect of trying to solve a challenge together. I think that's what ultimately is going to really, reduce the silos that we have and has a lot more opportunity for impact.
Thank you. Back to Kelly and then Craig for any final thoughts.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. I was just thinking about how wonderful it's been to be in conversation with these wonderful minds and good hearts on this panel. And thinking back 25 years ago when I was a grad student and in the biochemistry or in the phytochemistry lab and trying to raise awareness of this dimension, these considerations of the work that was going on back then, and the work was going on kind of without this kind of sensitivity and awareness. It was hard work to be heard and to be taken seriously back then 25 years ago, but today it's like just part of the conversation that we all know that we need to have when we want to have. So I'm excited about how things have changed. Thank you for this opportunity.
Craig, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we talked quite a bit about, biodiversity being in some form of crisis. So maybe I'll just suggest that the anecdote that some people might enjoy is like to go out there and participate in it, right? Go identify some local plants or, get out a field book, listen to some birds. Because we still have lots of biodiversity and it is great to be out there in it. I think it's really important, actually.
But what a great note to end this session. So thank you very much to the panelists. I really appreciate your perspectives and the time and the energy you gave us here. I would also like to thank the audience for being here. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and as well as CSPC for giving us the opportunity here to discuss, and specifically Trudy, who supported us in organizing today's session. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye now.